an explosion in the sky. This mobile phone footage was one factor that led Western countries to suspect an Iranian missile attack on the Ukrainian passenger plane. Finally, after days of vehement denial, Iran's military admitted its guilt. With armed forces on the highest level of alert, the Ukrainian International Airlines flight had appeared to fly like a hostile target near a sensitive military site.
When I became certain that this incident had happened, I really wished death for myself. I wished I had died and not seen such an incident.
Politicians followed. Human error had caused the missile to be fired, Iran's foreign minister tweeted. Meanwhile, the country's president, Hassan Rouhani, called the attack a disastrous mistake. The about-face comes after Iran maintained that a technical fault had been to blame for the crash, even after US, Canadian and British intelligence concluded that a surface-to-air missile had caused the tragedy. Canada in particular has paid a high price for the recent sabre-rattling between Iran and the US. This vigil in Toronto was one of dozens across the country that paid tribute to the 57 Canadian citizens, many of them university students and researchers, who were among the dead.
These people that were on the plane, they were young, they were academics, they were engineers.
As his compatriots mourned, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called for justice for the families of the victims and said he expects the full cooperation of Iran.
Let's cross now to Tehran and speak to journalist Reza Hasteh there. Good to see you. Iran's Revolutionary Guards have now taken responsibility for this crash. Is there going to be any fallout over this?
Well, it was a very important press conference by the IRGC's aerospace commander. It was really unprecedented. He accepted all the responsibility for the tragic incident. He apologized and said that the IRGC would obey all the decisions made by the country's officials over the incident. There are even reports of resignation, but I heard that they have been declined. They are ready to resign, but for now it is rejected by higher-ranking officials.
As I understand, and you've also tweeted, Supreme Leader Rouhani wasn't made aware of the cause of the crash until Friday. That was 2 days after. Did officials keep him in the dark?
Well, the IRGC commander said that on Wednesday morning, shortly after the tragic incident, he informed the country's officials, but he did not specify which officials had the IRGC informed about. And he later said that the country's General Staff of Armed Forces has quarantined the people who knew about it and decided not to declare the issue until further investigation is conducted on the incident. So I've heard that the president at least did not know about it until Friday. And the leader was also informed on the same day, according to a report by IRGC-affiliated Fars news agency. But no more can be said for now.
Reza, you just mentioned the investigation. How will all of this affect that investigation, the international investigation taking place at the moment?
Well, of course, now everything's clear. There would be no more work to do on the black box unless they are going to investigate whether it was intentional, again, unlike what the Iranian officials claim, which is, of course, not true because it was absolutely unintentional.
Good to talk to you, journalist Reza Hasteh in Tehran. Thank you. For more on this, let's cross to Kiev, Ukraine now and speak to David Stern, who's DW's correspondent there. Good to see you, David. What's been the reaction in Kiev today on Iran admitting that it did shoot down the plane, albeit a mistake, it says?
Well, yes, it's a very sudden turn of events. Just yesterday, the Ukrainians were sounding a note of caution, saying that they would look into everything before they reached any conclusions. They didn't want to jump to any conclusions. But now, obviously, there is a submission from the Iranians, and the Ukrainians have issued their own reactions. Most prominently, the president, Vladimir Zelensky, who issued statements in English and in Ukrainian. He said that this morning brings the truth. It was a sad day, though, and that the Ukrainians were insisting on a full admission of guilt, as well as bringing those responsible to justice, return of the bodies, paying of compensation, and issuing an official apology. And he's also said that the investigation would continue, and he hoped that it would be without any obstacles. We've also heard from the head of Ukrainian International Airlines, who held a news conference earlier. He raised his own questions, and indeed there are a lot of questions still. Why the airspace was not closed off? He said that they followed everything that was demanded of them. Obviously, this did not make a difference, and so in general, I would say among Ukrainians, there is a sense that this is obviously a move forward, but there are still many questions.
Just quickly, if you could, David, what can Ukraine do if those demands that you outlined are not met?
Well, we'll see. We now have this admission. Yesterday we heard from the Foreign Minister, Vadim Prystaiko. He said that they would take legal action. Now, this was before the admission, obviously, but he was speaking about working with Ukraine's allies and partners, and he said that it possibly could be taken to the United Nations if necessary, mentioning also the shooting down of MH17 Malaysian Airlines back in 2014 over Ukrainian territory, which Ukrainians are also waiting for justice on that one as well.
Our correspondent David Stern in Kiev. Thank you, David. Well, let's cross now to Finland and speak to Stephen Wright, who's Professor of Aircraft Systems at Tampere University there. Good to talk to you, Professor. Can you explain why the Ukrainian passenger, why this plane that had a known flight path could be confused with a hostile target?
Well, I can't actually. The military should know, obviously, their own personal location. And the thing that I find remarkable still is that the military are located so close to a very large commercial airport at Tehran. And what's particularly confusing for myself is Tehran itself, geographically, is a really big city that's surrounded by mountains. The airport is located away from the hills because planes don't like flying in that sort of general location. So therefore, why do you put a missile battery so close to an international airport? It's not very clear for me the strategic purpose of that, especially as it's civilian airliners that are taking off and landing.
What about the airport? Why wasn't the airport closed? Is that something that would or should normally happen in a situation of the heightened tensions that we're seeing between Iran and the US?
Yeah, normally, if you're going to have a conflict of some sort and you're going to anticipate problems, the country that you're going to overfly, they would normally issue some sort of alert. These would be going out to flight crew so that you can then brief. It's important to note that when an aircraft wants to fly from this point to that point, before the crews go to work, they have to report in and work out how they're going to fly. We're going to fly from this point to that point and over this country. So if there's a conflict taking place, for instance, when there was the Gulf War that have taken place previously, airlines made sure that they didn't overfly these areas where you know that there's going to be trouble. So they would fly around it, and they would need to plan this by carrying extra fuel. So again, it seems really unusual that the airspace wasn't closed if they were anticipating such major problems.
All right, Stephen Wright, Professor of Aircraft Systems at Finland's Tampere University. Thank you very much, Professor.